What, where, how, and when. Rosida sat reading the newspaper. Suddenly, her eyes fell on a sleeved headline. 100 years ago, how, she wondered, could anyone know what had happened so many years ago? Find out what happened. Yesterday, you could listen to the radio, watch television, read a newspaper. Last year, ask somebody who remembers, but what about long ago? Let us see how it can be done. What can we know about the past? There are several things we can find out: what people ate, what people ate, the kinds of clothes they wore, the house in which they lived. We can find out about the lives of hunters, herders, farmers, rulers, merchants, priests, craftspersons, artists, musician, and scientists. We can also find out about the games children played, the stories they heard, the plays they saw, the song they sang. Where did people live? Find the rivers Narmada on the map, phase 1 and phase 2. People have lived along the banks of the river for several 100,000 years. Some of the earliest people who lived here were skill gathered, that is, people who gathered their food. They knew about the vast wealth of plants in the surrounding forest, and collecting roots, fruits, and other forest products for their foods. They also hunted animals. Now find the Suleiman and Kithar hills to the northwest. Some of the areas where women and men first began to grow crops, such as wheat and barley, about 8,000 years ago, are located here. People also began rearing animals like sheep, goat, cattle, and lived in villages. Look at the Gairo hills in the northeast and Vindhyas in central India. These were some of the other areas where agriculture developed. The place where rice was first grown are the north of the Vindhyas. Trace the river Indus and its tributaries. Tributaries are smaller river that flows into the large river. About 4,700 years ago, some of the earliest cities founded on the banks of this river. Later, about 2,500 years ago, cities developed on the bank of the Ganga and its tributaries and along the sea coast. Look at the Ganga and its tributaries called the Son. The ancient time, the area along these rivers to the south of the Ganga was known as the Magadha, now lying in the state of Bihar. Its rulers were very powerful and set up a large kingdom. Kingdoms were set up in other parts of the countries as well. Throughout, people traveled from one part of the subcontinent to another. The hills and high mountains, including Himalayas, deserts, rivers, and seas, made journeys dangerous at times, but never impossible. So men and women moved in search of livelihood, as also to escape from natural disaster like floods or drought. Sometimes men marched in armies conquering others' land. Besides, merchants traveled with caravans or ships carrying valuable goods from place to place, and religious teachers walked from village to village, town to town, stopping to offer instruction and advice on the way. Finally, some people perhaps traveled driven by a spirit of adventure, wanting to discover new and exciting places. All this led to the sharing of the ideas between people. Why do people travel nowadays? Look at the map once more. Hills, mountains, and seas from the natural frontiers of the subcontinent. While it was difficult to cross these frontiers, those who wanted could and did scale the mountains and cross the seas. People from across the frontiers also came into the subcontinent and settled here. The moment of people enrich our culture tradition, people have shared new way of carrying stone, composing music, and even cooking food over several hundred years. Name of the land. Two of the words we often use for our country are India and Bharat. The word India comes from the Indus called Sindhu in Sanskrit. Find Iran and Greece in your atlas. The Iranian and the Greeks who came through the northwest about 2500 years ago were familiar with the Indus, called it the Hindus or the Indus, and the land of the east of the river was called India. The name Bharat was used for a group of people who lived in the northwest and who are mentioned in the Rig Veda. The earliest composition of in Sanskrit dated to about 3500 years ago. Earliest it was used for the country. Finding out the area, find out about the past. There are several ways of finding out about the past. One is the search for and read books that were written long ago. These are called manuscript because they were written by hand. This comes from the Latin words mano, meaning hand. These were usually written on palm leaf or on the special prepared bark of the tree known as the birch, which grow in the Himalayas. Over the years, many manuscripts were eaten away by insects. Some were destroyed, but many have survived, often preserved in temples and monasteries. These books dealt with all kinds of subjects: religious beliefs, practice, the lives of kings, medicine, and science. Besides, there were epic poems, plays. Many of these were written in Sanskrit, others were in Prakrit language used by the ordinary peoples and Tamils. We can also study inscription. These are written on relatively hard surface such as stone or metal. Sometimes king got their order inscribed so that the people could see, read, and obey them. There are other kinds of inscription as well, where men and women, including king and queens, recorded what they did. For example, king often kept record of victories in battle. There were many other things that were made and used in the past. Those who study these objects are called archaeologists. The study remaining of building made of the stone and bricks, painting, and sculpture. They also explore and excavate, dig under the surface of the earth to find tools, weapons, pots, pen, ornaments, and coins. Some of these objects may be made of the stone, others of the bone, baked clay, or metal. Objects that are made of hard, imperishable substances usually survive for a long time. Archaeologists also look for bones of animals, birds, and fish to find out what people ate in the past. Plants remain survive far more rarely. If seeds of grains or pieces of the woods have been burned, they survive in charred form. Do you think clothes is found frequently by archaeologists, historians, that is, scholars who study the past often use the word source to refer the information found from manuscripts. The inscription and archaeology, once sources are found, learning about the past becomes an adventure. As we reconstruct it bit by bit, we saw historians and archaeologists are like detectives who use all these sources like clues to find out about our past, one past or many. Did you notice the title of this book, Our Past? We have used the word past in the plural to draw attention to the fact that past was different from the different group of peoples. For example, the lives of herders or farmers were different from those of kings and queens. The lives of merchants were different from those of the craftsperson, and so on. Also, as is true even today, people follow different practices and customs in different parts of the country. For example, today most people living in the Andaman Islands get their own food by fishing, hunting and collecting forest products. By contrast, most people living in the cities depend on the others for supply of the food. Difference such as this existed in the past as well. Besides, there is another kinds of difference. We know a great deal about king and the battles they fought because they kept records of their victories. Generally, ordinary people such as hunters, fishing folk, gathering farmers, or herders did not keep records of what they did, while archaeology help us to find out about their lives. There is most that remain unknown. What do dates means? If somebody asks you dates, you will probably mention the day, month, and year, 2000 and something. These years are counted from the dates generally assigned to the birth of the Jesus Christ, the founder of the Christianity. So 2000 means 2000 years after the birth of the Christ. All dates before the birth of the Christ are counted backwards and usually have the letters BC, before Christ, added on. In this book, we will refer to the dates going back from the present using 2000 as starting point. BC we have seen standard for before Christ. You will sometimes find AD before dates. This stand for the Latin words Anno Domini, meaning in the year of the Lord Christ. So 2012 can also be written as AD 2022. 2012. Sometimes CE used instead of AD and BCE used instead of BC. The letter CE stand for Common Era and BCE for Before Common Era. We use these terms because of Christian era is now used in most countries of the world. In India, we began using this form of dating about 200 years ago, and sometimes the letter BP, meaning before present, are used elsewhere. We have seen that inscriptions are inscribed on hard surface. Many of these were inscribed several hundred of years ago. All inscription contains both script and language which were used as well as scripts have changed over time. So how do scholars understand what was inscribed? This can be done through a process known as decipherment. One of the most famous stories of decipherment comes from Egypt, a country in North Africa, where there were kings and queens about 5,000 years ago. Rosetta is a town of the north coast of Egypt, and where an inscribed stone was found, which contained inscription in the three different languages and script, Greek and two form of Egyptian. Scholars who could read Greek figure out that the names of kings and queens were enclosed in the little frame called cartouche. They then placed the Greek and Egyptian sign side by side and identified the sound for which the Egyptian letters stood. As you can see a lion stood for L and the bird stood for A. Once they knew what this letter stood for, they could read other inscription as well. Imagine.